upgrade process. This webinar will be recorded. If you prefer not to participate in the recorded session, please feel free to disconnect at this time. A link to today's recorded presentation will be emailed to all registered attendees. This webinar is a brief overview covering common use cases and scenarios regarding this topic. It is not intended to be all-encompassing. If assistance is needed, please contact Trellix technical support. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A window. This webinar may run longer or shorter based on your participation, and we recommend asking as many questions as you can to make the most of this series. If the Q&A window is not displayed, click the tab at the bottom of your session window and click on the Q&A icon. We will answer the questions during the final section of this webinar. If you experience any audio issues during the webcast, please drop and attempt to reconnect. Our first presenter today is Brian Barnes. Brian is a Principal Customer Success Engineer with 20 years of experience in cybersecurity. He is currently a subject matter expert in solutions like TIE and DXL, handling training, advanced architecture design, issue escalations, as well as an active participant in the community forums. You may have engaged with him in the past. In his time off, he coaches a youth softball team. Our second presenter today is Travis Merritt. Travis is a staff customer success engineer and has been with Trellix since 2012. His focus is on supporting EPO, the Trellix agent, TIE, and DXL. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian and Travis.
Thank you, Nick, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone that has joined us on the call today. We have gotten a number of questions and some cases around the TIE 4.0 upgrade process. It is unique to this version. Those of you that have upgraded prior are pretty familiar with the process of just checking in a package and deploying it to the servers. This one does have some additional steps involved, so I do plan to cover kind of an overview of that upgrade process, what's different about it. I also plan to demo the upgrade and promotion of a 4.0 primary server to an existing 3x environment. So we'll go through that and some of the nuance around that. And we'll also talk about what's been resolved in the March release that's coming out for TIE Server. One of the questions I get quite a bit that kind of trickle up to me is what's included in this change? What's the purpose of the upgrade? What are we getting out of it? And so obviously with the McAfee move over to Trellix, there's been a number of products that have released rebranding changes to the products. This update does include that rebranding. However, there's a much bigger component to it, and that would be the upgrade of the underlying OS that we're using from MLOS 2 to MLOS 3. It's a significant change, new wizards, a whole suite of new supporting libraries that are included with the image, and the lower risk vulnerability fixes that are included as a result of those library upgrades. So it's the first time we've had to do something like this with the TIE platform. So a little bit different than your typical upgrade. So considerations. MLOS 2 cannot be upgraded to MLOS 3. And so that kind of presents some hurdles where we could just use EPO to deploy upgrade packages out. That's not going to be possible in the move to 4.0. We will have to actually build out new 4.0 virtual machines to take over the existing deployment that we have. We do have the ability to migrate the existing data from any of the 3x builds that you have in production right now over to the newly built 4x servers. Any existing TIE 3x servers, we typically need to phase out and replace with newly built 4x servers. At a high level, this is the upgrade process. I would recommend to anyone that hasn't seen it, we have the installation guide for 4.0 out there that has these steps detailed in a little bit more context. But as with any other product deployment, any other upgrade, the first thing that you will do is upgrade the management extension in EPO to the 4x version. We only have the one management extension, so that's relatively straightforward, can be done through the software catalog. And at that point, you're ready to start kind of standing up these new MLOS 3 devices. So you'll deploy that out to a new virtual machine, for instance, turn it on, and go through the first boot wizard that you're presented with when you turn on the new device. That will handle getting it checked into EPO, getting policies pulled down, properties pushed up, certificates, etc. Once that device is in EPO, we will actually configure it as a secondary. So for a limited time, you will have a 4x secondary under a 3x TIE primary. And Historically, you couldn't have version mismatches like that. This is something that we're accommodating for in this particular upgrade to help with the data migration. Once we're comfortable that we've replicated that data over to our newly built 4X secondary TIE server, we can look to promote that to the primary server role to start taking over all those write operations and build out the rest of the environment from. Also, as part of that, we'll be looking to demote or shut down the existing 3.x primary, and that way we're not operating with two primaries. So with that said, we'll jump right into the demo. As with any product upgrade that you're going to do, it's always a good idea to get backups. For anyone that happens to be running TIE on bare metal, we do have an article out there describing how to back up and restore the Postgres database. I definitely recommend that you follow that. The vast majority of our customer base is using virtualization. So for that, you can kind of use the snapshot features of the platform to snapshot the primary VM before you do anything. You can snapshot all of the servers if you plan to displace them with new 4.x servers right away. The key one to get, though, is the primary that contains the copy of the database. And with that server, we can always rebuild out any of the rest of the infrastructure. So that one's key. So once you've done that and we're kind of comfortable moving forward, I always like to, when I start upgrades, kind of give everything a sanity check, give it a quick health check, make sure everything looks like I would expect it to see. If we do have some kind of break in DXL communication, for instance, we might have trouble pulling certificates. There's a number of issues we can encounter along the first boot process. So it's a good idea just to make sure things are in good shape before you start to upgrade. So my quick checks for that. I'll start in server settings, and the first thing I like to look at is DXL. So in the DXL topology screen, you'll actually see what I commonly refer to as the configuration versus reality, right? This is the brokers that EPO is aware of, and this is their configured communication state. So in my lab, I just have these three brokers. I have one at the root node, two child brokers hanging off of that. And I'll compare what I have here to what I have on the data exchange layer fabric page. This page is built live. It's done with EPO's connection to whatever broker it happens to be talking to, or you've configured it to talk to, and the reported information about what broker it's talking to. So I know I have three brokers in configuration. On this screen, I can see that I have three brokers connected and that EPO can see those three brokers. So just a good health check there to make sure everything that should be online is online. If you do see something that's kind of a miss here, maybe a broker's missing, I would definitely recommend you kind of stop and get that addressed before you proceed with the TIE upgrade. But overall, those are my checks for DXL. On the TIE side, I'll just check the TIE reputations page and ensure that I can see data load up there. This also leverages DXL to get this data, so that's why I check DXL first. The dashboards and queries that you may use for TIE data out of EPO will actually use a connection to Postgres directly. So I'll test that connection by hopping in and checking the dashboards to make sure they load. If there is a failure in us reaching Postgres, you'll get a unrecoverable error on each of these. And then lastly, I'll go back to server settings and take a look at my TIE topology. And as you can see here, I've got a relatively simple deployment of just the two TIE servers, a primary and a secondary. These are both running 3.x. But I'm mainly looking at this health check data down here to make sure I don't have like a DXL disconnected, or maybe my database and storage is telling me I'm out of disk space. If I see issues like that, also something we would want to address before we move forward with the upgrade. Once you're comfortable with that, we've got good backups. We kind of have sanity checked everything to make sure communication looks okay. You're probably ready to go ahead and get started. The upgrade process that we're going to use does allow us to build out this new 4.x server and ensure things are good before we displace anything. So kind of low risk to make sure, my upgrade is good before I actually switch over. We also kind of are afforded the opportunity, since we are replacing a server, to keep the older server around, for a disaster recovery if we were to need it or something like that. So first things first, as with any upgrade, or with most upgrades for EPS supported software, the software catalog is where you're going to want to go. The first thing to check in would be the TIE server management extension, and that can be checked in through the software catalog, or you can download it and check it in manually through extensions. Once that's done, and I've actually already done that in this lab, as some of you may have already picked up on, what your expectation should be is you will start to see little nag screens, right, telling you have a version mismatch. That's normal. It doesn't mean everything's broken. It's there because we typically do like to see all of these synced up. This is kind of a unique path forward for the upgrade, but you will see a little nag here at the top of the screen telling you your extension and server versions don't match. You'll also see the same in server settings when the health check data comes back, basically indicating the same. The versions don't match. That's expected, so you don't have to halt everything because we started to notice those warnings, but that's expected. You will see that until the servers are brought up to 4.x and match in version. They'll continue to operate like this, as with most of our extensions. So shouldn't be a cause for concern there. Once you're here, the next step would be to build out the VMs. We do offer an ISO deployment or an OVA, which is the more common one, just to deploy it and turn it on kind of solution. When you first boot up that virtual machine, you'll be presented with this. And so we'll go through this wizard together, and I'll try to cover some of the nuance along the way. So you'll be presented with the license agreement and immediately be asked to configure a root password. The text at the screen does indicate, but I also missed it the first time I was deploying this, to use the up and down arrow keys to move between fields. So these two password fields, I'm using the arrow keys to switch between. The tab key will actually switch you down to like the submit buttons or the buttons at the bottom of the screen. You'll also be prompted to create an admin user, and this is a non-root user that you can use to connect to the device remotely. And you'll be providing a password for that account. The next area you'll get is the NIC configuration to set up the networking. Word of warning, this screen does progress automatically pretty quickly if you don't pay attention to it. So you will want to kind of be participating actively in this process and switch it over to manual. I'm doing that with the down arrow and the space bar to move the little indicator there, then hit the enter key. In my labs, we have to use the manual configuration. I know that's pretty common for other people as well. So when you enter that manual configuration, you'll be asked to fill out the NIC information. So I'm going to do that here. You probably already noticed there's a bit of a formatting issue in the release build for TIE server. This should be resolved in the March update that we have coming out, but you can type, just kind of scroll over as you do. I would recommend, although it says DNS server is optional, that you do try to give the server good DNS server information. We have other configuration later in the wizard, like time servers, EPO server information, et cetera. And if you use names, we're going to need to be able to resolve those. So make sure you have a good DNS configuration. It's good if you are going to be using manual configuration to kind of have all this network info ahead of time. And you'll be prompted to proceed with the manual setup. Next, you'll be asked to provide a host name. This screen is another screen, kind of like the networking one, that will progress automatically. So I recommend that you interact with it and change the name to whatever you prefer. We do have a character limit issue here. I believe this field might be limited to 15 characters. And I have had some customers try to use this field to put in an FQDN. It's really just meant for the host name. We are adding a domain name field to that in the March update as well. So you'll have that ability to add that. You'll then get the time server configuration or NTP configuration. This is another point in the wizard. We do require functioning NTP for tie server. If you don't have something offhand that you know to point this to, you can commonly point it to like a domain controller or something like that. Often works. They're often running NTP. But I'd recommend you have good time server information that you plan to use here before you start the wizard. It will stop if we can't reach an NTP server. So it's good to have that ready to go as well. I'm just using my lab's domain controller for this. And after the NTP configuration, it's going to try to synchronize and then reset the system to leverage that same time. So the little 200 OK that we kind of see at the bottom of the left-hand screen right now typically means that our little quick test in the wizard actually was able to reach that NTP server. But after that, it does take about 2 or 3 minutes for the system time to actually get updated via the NTP service and get corrected. So the wizard will actually wait until that's done before we progress. So just give this a couple of minutes here. Okay, and once that time has been synced up on the system, you'll see the wizard automatically progress through a few network checks to make sure that the networking configuration is solid. If any of this does fail out, it'll actually take you back to the network configuration wizard to correct anything that we may have put in incorrectly. But this typically just progresses through. Once that's done, we'll do a little bit of initial setup on the device, installing a few RPMs and configuring some services. I think we also put the blank tie database down on at this step. And then you'll be prompted for the Trellix agent configuration. So this is all one-time use information. We use this to provision the agent, but we don't actually use this to administer the server once it's been onboarded. For that reason, I typically recommend that you just use an EPO server address like the IP instead of an FQDN in case there is some DNS wonkiness going on. But put in your EPO information here. Using the arrow keys to switch between fields. You do need like an administrative level user. It doesn't necessarily have to be the admin account, but it does need to have admin rights. And when you proceed there, you'll be presented with this screen. This is another quick sanity check just to kind of make sure you're connecting to who you think you're connecting to. So I can see this is connecting to bbarn CPO, which is my lab's EPO server. So I'm going to just proceed. I have had some reports of customers that are leveraging third-party certificates for their EPO UI, the connection for the browser, or maybe an unsigned certificate, self-signed certificate. If you are using one of those certificates, it's another thing that we're addressing in the March update, but for right now, we have a KB article, and luckily enough, it's actually presented to you when you encounter the error of some config file or some script edits you can make to leverage an insecure connection since we can't trust that certificate. In the March update, we'll be including a bypass option in the UI, so you don't have to take that extra step. But if you do encounter that, follow the prompts on the screen to the article. And then you'll be after the agent configures, and you'll be presented with a service selection. This is pretty common of our images. You can deploy these in what we refer to commonly as a combo of DXL and tie server. The DXL version included in this is 603. I already have a handful of brokers, so I'm just going to use the tie server portion here, but you can select both. And then once we're done with that, it's going to go through kind of doing some final prep to the device, finishing up some RPM installations and other things. once we finish this up, you'll be presented with this screen. So it does refer to on the screen that it may take up to 20 minutes. I'd say that's probably on the really extreme end. But there is quite a few things happening right here. The final message you'll commonly see is this waiting for Thai server handshake, which is true. That is happening. But this is the first time the Trellix agent has configured. So it's going to check in. It's going to provide properties, pull policy. We leverage that policy to facilitate our connections to get certificates. So there's a few things that are happening on this step while it's waiting. You can, if you want to help it along, you can go see if this is in your system tree and issue an ASCII. I have some customers that like to do that, but typically this should only take a few minutes to finish up. And once that's done, we'll actually see the device reboot and kind of start up clean now that it's configured. Most of the issues I see here with waiting for Thai server handshake have to do with DXL connectivity. So a lot of times if we're hung up and unable to get certificates, we do issue that certificate request to EPO over DXL. So another reason why we did that initial check through the UI to make sure everything looked good, because if you do have some break in the fabric somewhere, this step will likely fail out. So once that's done, it will advise you that you'll need to go into the EPO UI and configure a role for this server, and then it'll clean up and reboot itself. So I'll give this a moment to finish that up. And then we should go into the reboot. So at this point, the server first boot process is done. We've provisioned it. It was successfully added to EPO and pulled certificates. So the next step, as the UI had kind of directed you to, is to hop back into your EPO environment and assign that a role. You should see that system add itself to your system tree, likely in lost and found. I'll just move it really quick for my own. And when you look at that system, it should automatically show up, and it should automatically be tagged. So you can see this has the server and Thai server tags. If you opted to install a broker on it, it should also have the DXL broker tag. If any of those tags are missing, those tags are automatically applied based on the point products that the agent has informed us are installed. So you can drill down into the machine and look at the products tab here. And so the existence of this threat intelligence exchange server is what triggers the tag to apply. The same if we would see a DXL broker in the products list. If those are missing from the products list, you can wake up the device a couple times to get the agent to collect and send props, and that should get those to show up. If by chance they do show up here, but you're not seeing the tags applied, there are a couple of server tasks that will apply those. So for Thai, it's very aptly named apply Thai server tags to Thai servers, so very clear there. For DXL, it's a manage DXL brokers task, but those will, among other things, also apply the tag. We use that tag to determine which servers make it into the server settings. So I have my tag here. If I hop over into my server settings and my Thai topology, I should also see that device here. It will be in the unassigned state. So this is expected. It will not automatically assume a role. You'll have to come in and configure one. The next step in our process would be to move this over to the secondary role. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And the whole purpose of this secondary role change, and the only thing we're really trying to accomplish, is we're trying to leverage the existing hot standby Postgres architecture to replicate that database over to this server. So this isn't meant to be a final role change for this server. It's more of an intermediary step that we're using to copy the database over to this system. At this point, you'll also be able to reach the system through PuTTY. If this is your first time using a TIE server, you will not be able to use the root account to log in remotely. That's a pretty common security practice for Linux devices. So you have to use the account that you had created, the non-root account. And then you can switch using SU over to the root account if you'd like. I will make this text a little bit bigger, so hopefully it's easier to see. Most of the role changes that you do for TIE servers, database replication, and activity like that is actually logged in the temp directory. I'm going to use the tail command to monitor that. So it's just /tmc/reconfig -tie.log, not .com, .log. And so what's happening in the background right now, we just made a change to the topology. The way that that's distributed to the server itself is through policy. It's a policy update that the server gets. So we will have to allow time for the agent to check in and pull that policy. If you don't really see any activity in this log file, you can nudge it along with a wake-up call as well. I'm going to go ahead and do that since we're here. And once the device gets the policy, it'll parse that policy, make sure it has the right configuration. I actually forgot something to mention. Since we did just list this as a secondary, the primary also needs to be aware of that through a policy update. Our Postgres databases have some security built into them where only known devices are allowed to talk to them. So a certain access control list update is required on the primary as well when you add a new secondary so that it's allowed to talk. So I actually need policy updates on both. So I went ahead and woke up that primary as well. Once it gets that policy, it'll parse that policy and assume the role change. That will actually invoke this reconfig script that will advise the device what to connect to and start that database replication. So once that starts, we should see some movement in this reconfig -tie.log. Okay, now it's taken off. You'll actually see some messages if you kind of look at it that it's parsing that policy and everything else. We'll also see some status messages regarding the database replication. This should be at a point where it's mostly done. Up here, this step where you see, I'll highlight for you. This is actually the file copy, the replication itself taking place. So in my lab, it went by almost instantly. It's just a lab database. Your production database is likely to take a bit longer, depending on the size, but it'll actually report line by line progress about every second about how much of that file copy is done. So this may consume quite a few more lines when you're watching your upgrade compared to mine, but we want to make sure that gets to 100% and that's completed. Down at the bottom, once that's done, you should see some messaging about the transition from unassigned to secondary being completed. But I can tell here that this has already been done. I can see that the replication is finished. If you do, at this point in the process, start to see some messaging saying it's not allowed to connect, it'll actually say something like the pghpa.conf doesn't have an entry for this IP address. That's actually the ACL that exists on the primary. So that's kind of an indication maybe the primary hasn't checked in and got that policy. It will automatically retry. So you'll see here, it'll say attempt 0 for me. It worked on the first try for me. But if yours does not work, you can perform those ASCIIs against your primary to get that update to the primary. Or just kind of stand by and let it handle it through retries. So to set expectations, once that is completed, and this has been a hang up I've also had a few people bring up. This step was really meant to only handle that database replication. It will not actually take on the complete role of secondary and start, handling reputation requests from clients or anything like that. The installation guide kind of does just step you through the process of confirming that the replication job is done and then going in and changing it to primary. That's exactly what we're going to do. But I have had a few people that had an expectation that this would come online and start to work as a secondary. Unfortunately, it won't. The version differences aren't there, or that are there will prevent it from starting. It's actually the role change to primary that also facilitates the DB upgrade. So really all we were trying to do was list it as a secondary, get it to replicate. At that point, it's ready to move over to primary. We do have an existing primary, and when you come in here and try to role change to a primary, it'll actually generate this on the top. That tells you you shouldn't have more than one primary. So this is kind of up to you how you want to do this. I'll explain the differences. You can promote this to primary with the existing primary running. It will function, it will work, but any incoming write operations from clients will be divided up between the two, which is what you really want to avoid. Or you can shut down your existing primary, or maybe just stop services on the existing primary as you promote this one to kind of have a more graceful handoff from one to the other. But that is, up to you. I'm going to go ahead and make this role change. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to connect to my existing primary, and I'm just going to stop my services. So I believe I already have a connection open to that. And then one other kind of cleanup item you can do, you can come into the system tree and remove that system from the system tree just to make the policies look a little tidier. I would not recommend this option to remove the agent. I have the agent stopped right now, so it won't check in. I'm really just doing this to kind of clean up the UI. So once you reload that, you should see this server here. This change from secondary to primary will also be logged in the same reconfig tie.log. It's also a policy update that has to be deployed, so you can send a wake up to that device to kind of help it get that a little bit quicker. Another option, if you're already on the device, is this command here. CMD agent, it also exists on Windows, so a lot of you are probably already familiar with it. For our image, it's in the opt-MACV agent bin directory. You can call that with a switch for C to make it check in. They also have the P switch to collect properties, and an E switch to enforce policies. So if you're used to using the agent monitor on Windows, it's kind of the analog for the buttons that you click on the side of the monitor. But that can kind of help it along as well to get that policy change. The change from secondary to primary is typically quite a bit faster. We don't have to replicate a database, so we're just modifying some configuration files to indicate the role change and the direction of write operations and starting services. And so when that's done, you'll see this message. Sorry, I'll let it stop scrolling. You'll see a message that states its transition from secondary to primary was successful. So that's what we're looking for to kind of move forward. At this point in time, The services will be started up. You don't have to reboot or anything like that. To set expectations once again, the information that we get for the health check and this topology page is live. So that all comes over DXL, with the exception of this top part, the operation mode. This is actually done through system properties delivered by the agent into EPO. So actually get to a state where you probably have health check data coming in at the bottom to indicate that it is connected and everything else, but the top will not change until you've performed an ASCII and that's come in. This is, as I'd stated before, also the period where we upgrade the database from 3.x to 4.x. So it will take a couple more minutes than a normal primary promotion, but it shouldn't be that long. So just a few minutes. When it's done, you will see the health check data at the bottom of this screen kind of reflect that it's online and operational. And you can refresh that just by clicking off and clicking back into it. It will reissue that health check. So after you've changed it to primary, go ahead, send it the wake up call or perform the local wake up as you saw me demo just now. And then you can give it a few minutes and check the status by reloading this TIE server topology page. All right, and so here, as you can see, this is kind of that odd state I was referring to. You can see in the bottom, I have all of my health check data that I've retrieved over DXL, but this is sort of lagging behind the state of the server. So you can wake it up again, or just allow time for it to check in. The fact that it's reporting that it's transitioning up here is just a little bit stale because of the timing of us doing all of our refreshes. But when that checks in next, it will correct itself. Go ahead and have mine check back in. And so at this point in time, I would recommend you kind of step back through the UI and give everything a quick sanity check. You're likely to encounter one error as a result of configuration, which I'll show you. But if I access the TIE reputations page, we should see our data come up. If I access the dashboards, we'll probably error out loading these. So this is the unrecoverable error that I was referring to before. We did just shut down our existing primary and promote a new one. Depending on your configuration, your EPO configuration for where to send query data may be your primary. Some customers leverage reporting secondaries to facilitate that, but you might be using a primary. That's done in the registered server section of EPO, and you will have an entry for your TIE server. So that just needs to be pointed at the new device that we just onboarded. So I'll change this text here for my own sanity, but the actual configuration is on the next screen. It'd be the address here. And there's a test button here to make sure that that works. And once that's been saved, you should see that reflect pretty much immediately with any subsequent queries that you run. So my dashboards are loading. So at this point, I'm comfortable. I have my 4x primary up and running. It's accessing, or it has reputation data available through the TIE reputations page. It also has query data available through EPO dashboards or queries if I were to build those out. So this would be a successful upgrade. At this point in time, you can the next steps will vary depending on your deployment, but the overall goals would be to displace any existing 3x secondaries with newly built 4x secondaries. Process is the same. You go through the onboarding wizard, assign it the secondary role, and you're pretty much done. If you are an existing active response customer, or you have some 3x secondaries that you're going to leave online while you transition the other devices, you can do that. There is a KB article that you'll need to follow to address some certificate paths in a configuration file. So not really a state that we want to be in long term. But we will support a Tie 4 primary with 3x secondaries for use with active response. And then obviously, if it's just like an interim thing while you're migrating and building out new 4x servers, we understand that as well. So once that's done, you're good to go. So I did say I would cover some of the fixes that we have coming in the March release. I mean, frankly, we had a bunch of little hiccups along that wizard process when we're building them out, and this is where most of these are. One of the bigger problems is the first item you see here. If you are in that wizard and you reboot the device without it either failing out or succeeding at various parts in that wizard, you can get to a state where we don't clean up a flag to indicate that the script is running. So we have a flag that we set on the disk to indicate that we are in first boot wizard. If you physically power off the machine, we don't have the opportunity to clean that up, and subsequent reboots will actually get you to a point where it's saying it can't load a virtual disk, or it can't find a virtual disk, maybe virtual disk 2, 3, or 4. But that's really because we had started the wizard and resumed, assuming it was already in progress, but it wasn't. So we have a workaround for that right now, which is to remove the flag. But frankly, I would just wait for the March release and leverage that build that does not have that problem. I had mentioned during the MA provision or the TA, Trellix agent provisioning steps, that if you're using third-party certs or self-signed cert or something that we might not trust, you can encounter agent provisioning issues. That does give you a KB article, like I said, but we've given you an option in the wizard itself to take that additional step. So that's coming. There were various places where there were character limits. So the host name, for instance, I think I pointed out was a 15 character limit, and some customers were trying to use FQDNs there. It also exists in password fields. It'll truncate out anything you type in over the 15 characters. And then we also added to the wizard the domain name field, so you can specify that as well. So you've got increased character limits for password, host name, and an additional domain name field that you can use in the March release. The network setup prompts and host name prompts both would auto progress in short order if you didn't interact with them. I think they were 10 seconds. So that's been increased as well, so you don't kind of stumble across that step. We moved SSH access to remotely access the device earlier in that first boot process in case you do need to get in to make some config file changes. I think we've addressed most issues that would need that, but that is going to be moved back in the first boot process. So if you're hung up earlier in that wizard, you have another avenue to access the server. And then the text alignment issues during the network configuration. So kind of the limited field width for IP address and subnet mask, et cetera, has been corrected. For us, we've also included some new updates to the MER script that's included in the image. And we're going to be releasing a KB update for SNMP support. So with this change to MLOS3, the existing article for SNMP no longer works because of all the library changes. So we're going to provide some instruction for that. But that's everything. I really do hope that this helps out, that it kind of gives you a little bit of confidence to move forward. We should have that release out. So look for that if you're going to be building out something new. I would definitely recommend that you wait for that release. But hopefully this helps. Hopefully you got some confidence, some clarity, really, with a confusing change to the way that things are typically upgraded. So thank you for your time, and with that, I'll hand it back over to Nick.
Thanks, Brian. As a reminder for everyone, Trellix Education Services offers exceptional training to go along with our award-winning products. If you would like to learn more, please visit the website listed on your screen to see all of our offerings.